Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us for this discussion about LGBTQ plus folks in Aikido and some of our thoughts on what it's like to practice Aikido being LGBTQ plus. I will be the moderator. My name is Chris Coates. I'm from Los Angeles. I practice at Aikido Kenkyukai, Los Angeles. I'm a Shodan, been practicing about 15 years. And this discussion is being hosted by Leah Suzuki's Virtual Dojo. And we have Leah Suzuki here as well, the National Director of AKI International USA, which our headquarters is also in LA. Leah Sensei is my teacher for many, many years. So thank you, Leah, for hosting this event.
Thank you.
And we've got some other folks here from all around the world, maybe. We've got Sarah Halrell from, I'm not sure where. Why don't you introduce yourself, Sarah?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm from the Netherlands, so I'm based out of The Hague. I started practicing with Leah Sensei in LA, and now I continued here.
All right, and then let's go to Spencer.
I am Spencer Douglas. I've been dipping in and out of Aikido training for quite some time. I started in San Francisco, then trained in Kyoto, and most recently with Leah Sensei here in Los Angeles.
And we've got Jamie Lamb.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie. I use he, him, his pronouns. I started my Aikido training in Vermont, actually, at Blue Heron Aikido in Middlebury. Went on to train with Abe Seiseki Sensei out in Osaka, and ended up training for 5 years in Mie Prefecture. And then I came back to the States, started training in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm actually currently in the Twin Cities, although haven't had a chance to train very much because of COVID. I see Sam reacting, and we should definitely get connected because we did not know that we were like essentially neighbors.
Well, let's go to Sam then.
Hi, folks. I use she or they. My name is Sam Tatel, and I'm also in the Twin Cities training at East Lake Aikido with Galen, the Dojo Cho. And I came from the East Coast, though. Grew up in North Jersey and seminars throughout. Started training when I was 5, so I've been training 21 years now. So it's been a while, and I was also in Uchideshi at New York Aikikai and also trained there for 8 years, but before moving out to the Midwest. Looking forward to training with Jamie.
And we've got Tim Coonan.
Hey, y'all. Tim Kukin, they, them pronouns. I've been training Aikido about 8 years now, most all of it here in New Orleans, at NOLA Aikido with Brian Levy Sensei, and spent a lot of training over in Sweden with Jan Nevelius and Jorma Lilly Sensei as well. And just really glad to be here on this call with everyone. So thank you for having me.
Great, and lastly, we've got Ben here in Los Angeles.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Hyclack. They, them, or he, him pronouns. I've been training in Aikido for a little bit now with AKI, only about 7 months. But before that, I was in Philadelphia and took a bit of a break. Now I'm back at it, and I'm excited to be back at it for sure.
Nice. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I'm super excited. You know, joining martial arts many, many years ago, I felt like a little alone that I was the only queer person I knew doing martial arts. So it's really exciting to see all of you here all across the world, and also people that I've trained with that I didn't realize also identified as queer. So it's really cool. So we'll just get started with a couple of questions. The first question is, do you feel that your dojo is a safe space? This could be the dojo you currently train at, or you know, past dojos you trained at before. And, did your sexual orientation come into play when you were deciding or even thinking about doing martial arts? Let's start with Jamie on that one.
Sure. So I'm currently training, or like one of my home dojos, I guess, is Aikido of Madison, because I still maintain a home in Madison, and that feels like a really safe space. I think John and Robin Sensei do a really good job of making sure that everyone feels really included. And even though this space seems like overall safe, I think that there are times when there are like microaggressions or just like small homophobic comments that like aren't ill-intentioned. I think that I have a lot of like faith in the intent, the good nature of my colleagues and like fellow aikidoka. But I think that like just little tiny comments and like reactions, like, when I use, like when we're in the male locker room and, like someone like recoils or like kind of like has a reaction to something I'm saying about like either my partner or like, maybe recoil is not the right word, but like, those like tiny little homophobic jokes that I don't think people even notice, but I notice them. And I think that does sort of make me, take me a moment to sort of recover from. And so I think that even in the spaces that feel safe overall or generally, sometimes involve some little behaviors or actions that end up hurting a little bit. When I was training in Japan for 5 years with Ishii Sensei in Mie Prefecture, I had some concerns about it, and I never really brought up my sexuality or like my sexual identity, never came out to my fellow aikidoka and my teacher. And I think that that's something I really regretted. I felt like I really had to hide it because I think that in Japan, there's not a very like queer accepting society over there. And so I really valued my training with my colleagues, and that particular teacher kind of really deeply influenced me. And I was really scared, I think, to come out and to really be my full authentic self, even with someone who was really so impactful, both in not just for my training, but like in my life. And I think that, he passed away recently. And I think that that's something that I'll probably carry with me for a very long time, is just knowing that he didn't really know kind of the full, like authentic self that I could have brought to him. And so I think that definitely my like sexual orientation did come into play when I was thinking about, how I could be in certain dojo spaces.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a thing in itself to go into a dojo in the United States, but you go into another country and it adds this other layer onto things. Sarah, what's your experience been with that?
Yes, so for me, I think I didn't think about it so much when I started doing Aikido, because I come from a country that is generally really accepting of, at least of homosexuality, if not necessarily gender queerness. So for me, I wasn't so aware of it. Of course, I always had, like, you always get some comments, but it wasn't like really something that came into play that much directly. However, I will say that I definitely, when I do join any community, I will really take a hard look at whether or not people are generally accepting. So, and that was really something I did pay attention to, and I do feel really safe where I train right now, and I'm completely out in my dojo where I train, so everyone knows. And I feel like I'm very happy that I'm able to do that. And I do remember also the first time that I came to Leah Sensei's dojo, I remember walking up and seeing the rainbow flag there, and that did put me like a little bit at ease, because I figured, well, anyone who trains in a space where the rainbow flag is flying, it can't be too bad. So yeah, that's been my experience.
And how about you, Ben? We train at the same dojo, so I think we know it's feels pretty safe, but just curious about your thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I it's funny, Sarah, I thought the exact same thing when I first trained there too. Yeah, I guess something I should have added in my introduction there is that I am non-binary, gender non-binary, and so there's always like a few things that I have to consider whenever I'm joining any sort of space. Is like, especially when it comes to like a situation where there's going to be lockers, places where you know, bathrooms, issues like that come into play. I often will join any space kind of coding male because that's how most people see me anyway on the street. So that's kind of the like first step I take in any situation. But the dojo that we train at, AKI Los Angeles, is very, very friendly, very open. I think I've had situations in the past, just like Jamie, where I've seen very male-dominated spaces where it's maybe more professional on the mat, but maybe when you're like changing or, you know, just chatting after class, you just hear a few things that kind of put up a few red flags in your mind. And so it's always something that I try to be careful of. But when I first went to AKI, I saw that there were just people from all sorts of backgrounds, and everyone was super friendly and professional, no matter where you were. So I immediately felt very comfortable in that space. And so that was kind of a big inspiration for why I pursued Aikido through AKI here. I think it's been a really great space for that.
Right. And Tim.
Hey, yeah, so I have a little bit of maybe a unique experience in this regard, because I came out after I'd already started practicing at my dojo. So I've been practicing at No Aikido for a couple years, and then I came out as gender non-binary, genderqueer, pansexual as well. So it's sort of like in stages, my coming out to the people in the dojo, because there were only ever a few queer people in our dojo space, and I think a lot of us have experienced some of the similar things, like Jamie said, like little microaggressions. I also consider sometimes this sort of like body-oriented comments, you know, which can be, you know, pretty inappropriate, but in the sort of context of like a male-dominated culture, often this stuff is normalized. But my experience on the whole has been pretty good and very supportive, especially from like the senior instructors. Very supportive of encouraging coming out into the space, and then encouraging like some sort of paradigm shifts that I've been trying to bring in. Major one being like sharing pronouns in circles. But one of the main things that I see in terms of is it really welcoming or not is just the idea of often, and I see this in other dojos I practice too, but there's often a notion of like don't ask, don't tell in dojo spaces, where it's like we don't want to know your sexual orientation, and sometimes for a cis straight person that seems like a decision that's like leveling the playing field. But for queer people, it often feels like we can't be our whole authentic selves because we're not allowed to talk about it because it makes other people uncomfortable. So that's the main issue I've felt, is that people don't want to address like if people are queer or not, because for cis straight people, it often makes them uncomfortable. And there's this notion of keeping politics, identity politics out of the dojo, but I think a lot of us can attest that the body is an inherently political thing already. So we really need to, I think, to face that head on. So that's just my thoughts. The dojo feels very safe, but there's definitely consistent, you know, little microaggressive tendencies that I think both from individual and part of a general culture as well.
Yeah, I think just personally, I had so many moments growing up when I was like in gym class or trying to participate in sports that, you know, I wasn't really that good at, and dealing with that sort of the machismo and the you know, the masculinity sort of like, oh, like, you know, are you weak, bro, or that kind of thing. And you know, you're not good at sports, it's like this like badge of shame you have to wear. And so I feel safe in Leah Sensei's dojo. Obviously, I've been training with Leah Sensei for 15 years. I've always known, I feel like I knew right away that Leah Sensei was a very open-minded sort of person who was just interested in meeting all kinds of people and making everyone feel welcome. But even just when we have seminars and people come that I don't know, like I don't know anything about those people, but I automatically maybe feel a little bit guarded around the other men, especially. And then I have all these thoughts going through my head about, you know, oh, I've got to be like a tough guy for this like straight guy because like I'm the gay guy, so I better be like tough. And then like some of those guys can be really like their Aikido's really just like, you know, personally not what I'm trying to find within my Aikido, but very tight and aggressive, and it can trigger certain things sometimes. So that's my personal thought, but our dojo feels good. But I think there's all these like little micro things happen when you train with new people or people that, you know, you're not quite sure how they might feel about, you know, people with other sexualities. We'll move on to the next question. And this sort of carries on, but do you guys think that martial arts culture deters LGBTQ people from participating? And is Aikido, you know, necessarily in a way more attractive to queer people and LGBTQ people than other martial arts? And I think we'll start with Spencer on this one.
Thank you. I meant to mention earlier my pronouns are he, him. Was reminded by Sam when she gave theirs, so thank you. I think this is an interesting question because as soon as I heard it, it tensed up when I heard martial arts culture, because in some, I kind of divide Aikido from martial arts culture in a way. I think a lot of people tend to think of martial arts per se as aggressive, as kicks and punches. You think Cobra Kai and Kill Bill and all of these more aggressive things. And as an LGBTQ community, on the receiving end of a lot of aggression, whether that's physical or verbal or socio-political, I think it puts us in a different place where Aikido, the self-defensive nature of Aikido and the approach of Aikido is maybe more resonant to people who've been on the receiving end of those kinds of attacks. I think the notion of attack meeting attack wasn't really resonating with me, having been on the receiving end. And also, I think the other thing that really was interesting for me when thinking about this question is the harmony that comes with Aikido. Our community, you know, like it's a nature of patriarchy to create infighting and division within communities to distract us from rising up or moving forward, from advancing. And there's something in the harmony of the LGBTQIA and so on community that doesn't erase any of those individuals. It embraces all of them and has us working in concert, in harmony with one another. Not to say that there isn't infighting or problems within our community, there definitely is, but the notion that we aren't just sweeping any of those individual ones under the rug and we keep adding letters instead of trying to just erase them by creating an umbrella term. And I think that harmony really resonates with me as well.
Great, and my bad, but I skipped Sam on the last question. I'm trying to be a good host here. So Sam,
Thank you.
we're still in the bubble of being queer in martial arts and how you feel at the dojo. So I mean, you can speak to this current question and also want to hear your thoughts on the last question as well.
Yeah, I think my strongest reaction was when you were talking about being a big presence on the mat. And I definitely can come off as a bruiser. I do like to train hard, but that's also overcoming the sexism that other folks bring, because I don't want to only be validated because you're like in some way afraid that I can throw you harder than you can throw me, and that be a dangerous situation for your ego. Is really curious. And also something that I was thinking about is when I was in New York, Yamada Shihan called me he a lot. And I always battled with it because in a way I feel like he was trying to like offer respect for my Aikido in the way that he knew, the way that he was socialized and brought up, right, as a man coming from Japan and now in America as a businessman. And I was fine with that, but also a little like taken aback of like, I don't want to be called he for you to see me as someone to respect. And I've still navigated that. And even just the culture is different. There's martial arts culture, yeah, and I do think Aikido operates within that. I definitely am on the more bodily side of it. I'm exploring the philosophy, but this martial arts culture and even changing room culture, they are really interconnected. And I've had the benefit of, right, growing up in the community of the changing room of women identified folks. So that's really different, right, than the men's room as well. And then also you think, how do we make that inclusive? Individual changing rooms is also feels lonely because there is a culture in changing rooms. That is a large part of martial arts. We have a uniform we put on, we transition from the outside to bring ourselves onto the mat. And that transformation that we go through is really community building. We share things about ourselves. I also bring a different other. I'm a person of color, I'm Black, I'm mixed. And so almost my queerness has always been something I've inhabited, but it's not the first like boundary or issue that I address or overcome in a dojo. And the benefit of growing up in many dojos, I've just grown up navigating this. So it's not a wall that I've hit, it's I'm gonna show up here and be me. And I have enough training where I can hold my space and you can deal with me. And that's been something that I've benefited from, but not everyone started as a kid. Not everyone stayed. So martial arts culture, I do think, is something that needs to evolve to be more inclusive. And that's changing room, that's on the mat, that's off the mat. That's just how we treat each other in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you for circling back to me.
No problem, sorry. And Jamie, what are your thoughts on martial arts culture and Aikido?
There is so much that I want to echo from Sam. I think that just so much of that resonated with me, especially as someone who like also started really, really young doing martial arts, not Aikido in particular. I did Kung Fu from the age of 5, but also being someone who was like a smaller kid, someone who's like smaller of stature. And yeah, just having to like exert myself in a way that I think other people like didn't have to. And I thought like a lot of that is connected to martial arts culture in the United States in particular, this like very hyper masculine sort of like tough it out, like this idea that like, you know, like your size and your strength sort of dictate outcomes. And I think that that does keep a lot of folks away, because I think who are queer, because I think about this from the lens of also being a psychotherapist, and as someone who knows, you know, and sees the impact of just how much trauma is in our community, and how like much more frequent like exposure to trauma is for queer LGBTQIA folks. And so like that sort of culture where it's like you just suck it up and like, you know, you take the hurt and the pain, and like that's just potentially really harmful and like re-traumatizing for a lot of people, and is probably a really high barrier to entry for a lot of folks, particularly for folks who are at certain like intersections of queer identity and other identities. I think cost is another thing that tends to be a barrier for people. Like I think there's like we as a community are like disproportionately affected by poverty and like issues around SES, and so I think that like cost is another thing, especially in the States, where I feel like cost of training is like super duper high. Less so in Aikido, I think, but like in a lot of other martial arts. I think Aikido probably is more attractive because of some of these philosophical tenets that people are bringing up. But I think also, I mean, for me as a queer person, I think something that I've realized is the inversion of that idea of power, right? The fact that, you know, I'm like 155 pounds, 5'8", and like, you know, I've trained for long enough where like, you know, like a 6'5", whatever, like however many pounds, like, you know, dude, it's like, I'll reverse you. Like if you try to rough me around, like I will reverse you. Like I'm not going to take that dangerous ukemi. And so I think that like that piece has felt really empowering in many ways as a queer person who, you know, has experienced bullying, who has experienced like being on the other end of that like power imbalance, and being like, this is something that I can use to correct for that.
Great. And Sarah?
Yeah, so I actually want to say something in response to the don't ask, don't tell that was brought up, because I do feel like that's something that is quite prevalent in martial arts culture. I've heard it quite a lot. Just, just don't tell people about your sexuality. Just don't tell people about your gender identity. I think that's quite hard also, because on the one hand, it's something that's so ingrained in us, and also on the other hand, because Aikido is something that's so physical, I do also find that for me, I actually try to be out as soon as possible most of the time to avoid people saying, "Oh, but I've been touching you, and now you say you're gay," or So I do find that I'm a bit careful in that, because you can also get negative reactions from not being out. So I find that interplay between those two opinions, like, oh, I really want to know, and otherwise I feel you lied to me, versus, oh, but just don't tell us because it's not something that has a place here. I find that very interesting and sometimes also quite challenging to navigate. So that's something I'd, kind of bring to the table.
Right. So this next question, I think, is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, in terms of just seeing there's a lot more, much greater lens on, the violence that trans people specifically face on a daily basis. And I would like to just preface that, unfortunately, we don't have any trans people on this forum, but it's a very important perspective, and it's one that I would love to hear someday. But and I think even just as someone who identifies as queer or gay, I often felt kind of powerless when I was a kid, and so this question of how do you think LGBTQ people can benefit from martial arts, I think is very near and dear to me, because I think even if it's not about being able to kick somebody's ass or fight off an attacker, which I think for a lot of queer people could be very useful things to know, I think that people in our community can really benefit from the things that I benefit from, which is this increase in confidence, this increase in my feeling that I can take care of myself, that I don't have to sort of feel afraid, or necessarily feel I don't have this feeling of weakness and helplessness, and I'm just able to sort of, and Aikido really helped me to sort of find my grounding within myself, and like we do in practice, be able to deflect things that come my way much more easily. So I'm curious how you guys think that LGBTQ people can benefit from Aikido or martial arts in general. And let's start with Sam on this one.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to connect this back to the first question even. I think dojos need to be safe enough, right, to explore our discomfort and boundaries. And that's how we better understand ourselves and our training. And when one of your identities presents that discomfort for others or for yourself, then you don't get to explore these other limits and edges for you to grow. And right, growth, you need discomfort. That's how we expand and test ourselves. And when the barrier to entry to find that training is kind of the outside setting or environment because of who you are, that's where, right, the dojo is not a safe place and that doesn't work for you. And either you need to leave or the dojo needs to change, but you shouldn't have to change to access that training. In that, when you find a place where you can do that, where you can train and be fully yourself, I think that Aikido has just helped me be in tune with myself. It helps me understand my reaction to outside things. I notice what my body is doing, and those cues are really hard to pick up on. And Aikido works with all those little nuances and facets, so you can notice them not just physically, but in your relationship, your connections. You can notice how other people perceive you, how you can change yourself a little, right, to finish the relationship or to build the relationship. We practice this physically with techniques very often, but that interplay, that tension, it helps you be more aware of it outside relationships as well as in yourself, which is where I think you can really understand yourself better with Aikido as a tool to do that.
Spencer?
Yeah, I think there are two things that came up for me with this one. One is just, and this applies to everyone, but I think within our community, we definitely experiencing this falling and getting back up. And it's one of the first things you learn in Aikido is how to fall and fall well, but get right back up, right? And this is something that has resonated for me throughout my life. I think it kind of is parallel to the coming out process, where it's something that you have to keep doing in your life every time you start a new job or meet a new friend of the family or whatever it is coming out, unless you're a celebrity announcing it on Twitter. It's something that you're going to repeatedly do throughout your life, and to do that, and it's so partly, I think, transformative because it is taking you from a place of shame to a place of pride. And pride is this word that's really important to our community. And I think that that journey from shame to pride is something that confidence is what you're practicing in those baby steps in between. So what you said, Chris, about that confidence and having grown up with the shame around being gay or bi is something I definitely learned through my practice at Aikido. So for me, it's not only the power inversion that Jamie mentioned, but it's also the shame inversion into a place of pride.
Jamie?
Sure, yeah, I think that like, one of the things I think of is just like, it changes the way that you hold yourself, right? Aikido, I think that just the physical aspect, it makes me like, feel like I'm less of a target. And just, I think this feeling of knowing that I have some sort of physical recourse that doesn't change based on the size of the other person in front of me is a really big deal for me. And I think a really big deal for a lot of people who have experienced bullying or violence. Like I said before, I think another piece that I think about when I think about this question is also just having a community of people, like when done correctly, right? With a common goal of training that isn't necessarily identity-based. So I think that it's really important for us to have like identity-based communities, you know, for anyone who has marginalized identities, right, queer or otherwise. But I think that like oppressed identity-based commonality can be really exhausting sometimes. It's just because it just feels like, especially nowadays, like work, right? Or work, or like, you know, what I'm doing to survive, right? Like we're banding together in order to survive sort of this world that we're in right now. But it feels really good to have a dojo community of people who are not like me in these regards, who I feel like I can count on, people who I can trust with, like literally my life, right? Like my body, my life, my physical integrity, and that we can engage in that practice together, trusting one another with our differences. And I think that that's really, really huge. And sometimes not all spaces feel that way for us as queer folks, that we can necessarily trust the people around us, you know, to the degree where we're like, I can trust you with my safety. I can trust you with my body. And I think that that's really powerful.
Sarah?
Yes, so first off, I want to answer with, of course, it's the same benefits as for anyone. So we don't have extremely different benefits from Aikido than anyone else, of course, but there are, that said, some things that are extremely important, just, and even more important if you are a person that is genderqueer or sexuality queer. And I definitely echo the sentiment about community. That for me has been one of the most important things about Aikido. Just finding a community where you are accepted for who you are, and you also learn to grow and to become more confident, to accept each other's differences, to work with each other. I think that's really important, especially for people who maybe don't always have that experience, that they are welcome everywhere, to find that kind of space. I know for me it has been. And then the other aspect is, I think, the mental health aspect. people in the LGBTQI community do have still a lot more prevalent mental health issues, unfortunately. So I think especially people in this community can benefit very much from the stability that Aikido training can offer you, and just the little bit of time to come to rest, to work with yourself as well, and to grow. Yeah, I think those are the most important things as for me, and I think for a lot of people.
Right. And something came up for me listening to you guys speak to this, and this is a good transition to our next question, which is very much related. But, you know, I still am a very sensitive person, but as a child, being really, really sensitive and not good at sports, you know, obviously that attracted a lot of bullying, a lot of name calling. And I always, for the longest time, really thought of my sensitivity as this fault, as something that was like, made me weak, you know, something that was wrong with me, something that, you know, really held me back. And then you start training Aikido, and it's all about getting more sensitive. And so that like process for me of seeing sensitivity as this like actual something that you wanted to like deepen and hone, and you know just make as deep as possible, actually gave you more control over situations, because you're more sensitive to how a certain person is looking at you, or think, or you know what the vibe of a certain situation is. And so it became this like kind of like superpower in a way, to like be able to like hone your sensitivity through training. And I mean, for me, that's been one of the biggest benefits, seeing this thing that I used to think was a weakness and actually realizing it was one of my greatest strengths. So for you, maybe in a, you know, like I said, related to the last question, but maybe from a more personal standpoint, how has Aikido benefited you as a person? And let's start with Sam on that one.
Definitely connecting with what Sarah said, Aikido, growing up in Aikido has helped me love movement and my body, and the freedom it has offered me from that movement. I can get into really bad mental places. And so moving through Aikido is what regulates my system. It helps me kind of hold and occupy my space fully and fluidly. And that flexibility that Aikido trains is really important. And in that training, we practice all the time, or I try to practice all the time, embracing conflict and tension and transforming it. And that practice is so broad. It's helped me in many, many aspects of my life. Maybe not, it's on the resume, but maybe not like this is an applicable skill where it can set me up for something very specific, but broadly in my relationships and the connections that I have fostered and cultivated, Aikido in relationship building and setting up boundaries that are healthy for me and allowing me to just be the best person I can be. Aikido has been a platform, a foundation that I don't know who I would be without it, because I built from it. Growing up in a dojo, training all the time, I wouldn't be me. So for me, it's really hard to separate. I can't say what I specifically got from Aikido because I've never grown or developed without it. It's always been a lens that I have had the benefit of having, but really, as Sarah said, helping my mental health, because I can be really, really in a bad place with Aikido. So without it, I don't want to think about it. But specifically for these times, embracing conflict and tension, but then we transform it.
Mm-hmm. Tim?
Aikido for me has been just a hugely transformative experience. I mean, I want to kind of echo a couple of things both of you said, Chris and Sam. You know, growing up at a young age, experiencing lots of bullying for my sensitivity. I've never identified with the gender I was born into, right? I'm not cisgender, and that is something that I never like came out and realized until after I started practicing Aikido. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think Aikido brought me deeper into my body sensibility than I'd ever been before. And it allowed me to come out and experience that part of myself that had been kind of buried away and closeted from a young age out of bullying and societal pressures and the masculine domination and how my body presented and all those things. So in just that respect, it's been hugely transformative of kind of body empowerment and coming into my real humanness. And as well, I think in terms of other practices as well, Aikido I feel is so close to like somatic practices that it's always engaging mind-body connection, right? And in that sense, like a couple of you were saying, it kind of empowers me to frame relational and interpersonal things in a different light and embrace and transform conflict, find nuance and be sensitive and see that sensitivity as a strength. I think I remember one of the first couple, like maybe just less than a month or two into my practice, we had a visit from Miranda Sensei from Finland, who's a wonderful teacher. And I was kind of way over my head. I felt like I had no idea what was going on, but just staying sensitive and moving. And I remember someone was like, "Oh, he is very sensitive. That's great." And it was kind of like, "Oh, this is really good to be sensitive" realization. And that's a power and a strength that I already had that has served me in Aikido growth, you know, within the framework of the art and just in general, being empowered by that, seeing that as a strength is really beautiful. So yeah, in that sense, it's been really transformative for me, really beneficial, and just continuing to move forward with that full mind-body empowerment is something that, you know, I don't know how that would have happened to me if I hadn't done this practice. Again, like Sam said, it's kind of, even though I've only practiced 8 years, those 8 years, there's like an inseparability between things that I've grown into and how the art has affected me as well.
You're muted, Chris. I'm not sure who you're calling on.
Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really, really awesome points made by everyone, and I'm kind of going to echo a lot of them. I've been thinking a lot about that sensitivity and that sort of mind-body focus a lot, especially now that we've been training under quarantine for the longest time, not being able to train with a partner. But instead of seeing that as a kind of negative, I think especially Leah Sensei has been teaching classes in a very helpful way of like, instead focusing being very conscious of like everything, every part of your body and what you're doing, and being very sensitive to like every action that you're making down to like exactly where your foot's pointing and everything like that, which I personally find is after thinking about it a lot, is really the reason why I've always been attracted to Aikido. Well, maybe not always, I didn't realize it existed for a bit, but when I found it, then that's when I got really drawn into it. Because yeah, Tim kind of mentioned it too with their experience, but yeah, I've always felt very, not very connected with my body. I felt very, so at times very trapped in my body, not feeling very like comfortable with the body that I have, being, you know, the way it looks and stuff. And so I've always been very, I've gone through a lot of issues with my gender identity and how that manifests in the world. So I've experienced like a lot of depression from that. And so that's been a big issue, but something I've always found very helpful with coping with whenever those pains start coming up is focusing on some sort of physical task. Growing up, it was always like, you know, washing dishes or something simple like that, or even just dancing. But then when I found Aikido, I thought that it was such a really powerful thing for me, because it was taking that like focus on a physical action and taking it to just like 5 levels higher, because instead of just like, you know, focusing on the thing you're doing, you're really focusing on your whole body doing an action, performing a technique or whatever it may be. And so I found that like I've been much more comfortable in my body, and I've been much more able to feel more at home with myself when I'm doing Aikido on the regular, because I think it just helps me so much with sort of being more conscious with my whole body and accepting it, and being able to move forward with it. So I think it's been a really powerful relationship I've had with Aikido in regards to that. I think you're muted again.
Our final question.
Oh, can I jump in on that one, Chris? Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go for it.
Oh, that's okay. Because I found it so fascinating what Sam was saying, because I've had such the same but opposite experience. I did the opposite of growing up in the dojo community. I actually, as I mentioned, dipped in and out, and it's been 6 months here, 6 months there, a year there. That said, I practice Aikido every day. I am in my job working with executives or filmmakers, or discussing politics more recently. I think we're in such a conflict heavy environment right now, where this side has their opinion and facts and figures, and this side has theirs, and this is all that's happening. Everyone's talking and no one's really listening. And Aikido really teaches you to listen and take someone who's coming at you with their perspective or their objectives, and find a way to blend with that and take it in the direction that feels more peaceful as a resolution for everyone involved, more harmonic. And so I really have appreciate that. I also want to say I'll come out to you all as a Gen Xer, which is why I value the letters, the LGBTQIA, because I think every generation has something of value to add. And even though I understand completely the idealism of Gen Z, of where we're headed, and the anti-label triggering of millennials, my generation did contribute the labeling, because to have the conversation about identity politics, you have to have the language. So there was a point where that was valuable, even though we were evolving past that. But that said, as a Gen Xer, there's something that was really missing for me that I'd heard about in Western culture, which was this notion in Greco-Roman times of having the older gentleman for gay and bisexual men kind of mentoring a younger person. And as a Gen Xer, there's a whole generation of gay and bisexual men who were wiped out by the AIDS crisis. And so I am lacking in that male mentor in my life, and a lot of people of my generation are also just missing. A whole group is just missing for us. And when I learned about the senpai kohai relationship in Japanese culture, of the experienced and the novice, it really resonated for me. It was something I was really drawn to, and I've experienced that on the mat, where there's always, well, not always, but often someone more experienced than you, someone less experienced than you. And as soon as I stepped onto that mat, I plugged into something that I didn't even know I was missing until I got there. And it was a really beautiful thing for me. It was like a homecoming, and it's invaluable in a way, and I'm tearing up here, in a way that I can't even really necessarily put into words, but I think you get the picture.
Yeah. Great. So our last question, I think, could be helpful to people who maybe aren't LGBTQ, or are and have their own dojo, or even just members of other dojos that want to make sure that other people feel included and welcome in the dojo. So we'll start with Jamie. How do you think the dojos can be more welcoming to LGBTQ people?
Yeah, so this is something I've thought about a lot. I really petitioned to be able to answer this question today. I think I'm going to lead off with something that I think is pretty controversial for me to say, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think that at this point, we need to be reevaluating our relationship with law enforcement, in terms of whether we're training law enforcement, we're training police officers, because we as a queer community, we are at greater risk of police brutality, and certain parts of our community more so than others, right? Like BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color, like Black trans women, we're at greater risk of police brutality. And at the end of the day, Aikido is still a martial art. That has been drilled into me from my kind of training pedigree. The Yamaguchi sensei line is always whatever you think about the philosophy, Aikido is a martial art first, primarily. And I think that when we ask queer people to give the gift of their bodies their ukemi, right, their trust to people who might then in turn use this to harm them, right, to physically harm them, to put them through a criminal justice system that is designed to destroy them, right, to destroy their communities. Like that is, I think, at odds with just ethics. And then also it's at odds with this idea of like us being an art of peace, because nothing about that is peaceful. Nothing about that is harmonious. And so I think that there's like a really serious like soul searching that needs to happen around like, you know, who are we training and who can we trust to really hold like this gift that we're giving to each other, and like what capacity are we increasing for violence? Because Aikido, you know, we have, you know, philosophical tenets that sort of bind us, but these are still martial techniques that can be used to harm people. And so I think that that's like, you know, in terms of if I'm a like queer person walking into a dojo and I know that, you know, someone here's a police officer who might use this to harm me, like that's not a welcoming space for me. That makes me feel unsafe. So that's like kind of the most controversial thing that I'm going to say with regards to this question, I think, and I just led with that. I think also just figuring out ways for spaces to feel less binary, like, because martial arts just, again, that like history and that pedigree that it comes from Japan, like so binary. And I think that like, however we can like make these spaces feel less binary would be so helpful. And I think also creating a culture of mutual respect and inclusion means not just like doing that on the mat and then like going home. I know it's harder with COVID because we're not really like, we don't have the opportunity to be in like contact with each other, but I think that like just making space in dojo communities for people to get to know each other, to like share a meal together, or like, you know, share some time, like really getting to know each other more as like people rather than just training partners, like allowing some space for us to really like be our full authentic selves, not just on the mat, but off the mat with each other, I think would make it feel more welcoming, because it would, I think, create a culture where it's like, oh, my dojo mates like are actually interested in who I am as like a full human being, right? I can share things about like my partner. I can share things about, you know, just my experiences as a queer person. And I think that that's kind of another way that we can do that.
Right. I think that, you know, our dojo has always had a practice of going out for pizza and beers and stuff afterwards. And I think that that always made me feel so much more comfortable being able to say, oh yeah, you know, even if people didn't know, like, well, it's, you know, me and my boyfriend, just throw that out there. And it's like, well, here it is. You can deal with it now. And it's always been good. So I think that's a good point to make. Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I just want to say, Jamie, I like really second this talking about the kind of carceral stuff going on in our society and not wanting to reinforce that. And I really think that's important. And I want to kind of take a tangent off of that in a direction of in how I think it can be more welcoming and inclusive, not just to LGBTQIA+ identities, but Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I think that there's often a discussion around like not wanting to make white, cis, heteronormative males uncomfortable. And I think we have to drop that. Like they're gonna have to be uncomfortable because they need to get with the curve of the change in the world, or they're gonna be left behind. And I don't think we can afford to like make Aikido tiptoe around that anymore. I don't think that we can tiptoe around that in any of our world anymore. And I really think that's super important, because I find that that's been, I'm feeling passionate about it because it really gets me when I feel people discussing things with that regard. Or they're like, well, I want you to be included, but what about this like white Trump supporter? Shouldn't they be included too? And it's like, well, not if they're going to be hateful, not if they're going to be bigoted. You know, like we need to get over that and realize that if these people aren't going to be willing to do the work to overcome their prejudices and to learn and to be open to listening. Again, this is part of the art of Aikido, right? If they want to practice Aikido, they should be invited to listen and grow. So, yeah. So I think it's, that's like a fundamental thing for me is to get over that hump of like wondering if these people are going to be made in discomfort. A lot of us queer people, we've had so much discomfort. We've lived our lives in discomfort. And often like a white cis male hasn't had to experience very much discomfort particularly for their body or their identity. And so I think it's just time that we address that question. Another thing I wanted to talk about is respectability politics. So if you know this term, you might know what I'm talking about. But respectability politics is often considered like a tool of white supremacy in our culture. It can be something as simple as like, I have painted nails and people think that's weird. Or like if you have like dyed hair, or the way you dress or present your gender, right? Gender presentation, not necessarily just identity. And there's like a certain level of like respectability. And I think in Aikido, obviously we go get changed and we all wear like these uniforms, and that's part of our community and our process. But I think we also have to be careful about not ostracizing people because they might have a different kind of personality dynamic or a different presentation. Some people are like louder than others. If some people are more, boisterous or bombastic than others. If some people have like a funky hairdo, painted nails, all these kind of things, I think fall into that respectability politics realm. And I think Jamie was saying a little bit about the binary-ness of the Japanese culture as well, and in Aikido. And I think that's part of it, is there's this kind of binary of like how you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to behave. There's a certain level of the formalities that are very important and wonderful for Aikido. And then there's a certain level of formality that I think we need to be careful about. So those are just the things that I wanted to address. And you're on mute, Chris.
Sarah?
So first off, I want to echo the getting to know each other off the mat being so important. I completely agree with that. I think it's so important to actually create this community with inclusivity for everyone, to actually have that chance to get to know each other a little bit more, to have social meetings as well as training together. And then my points on this question, mostly, the first is don't assume anything. I know that's very hard. We all assume things and we're all going to keep assuming things, but try to double check yourself all the time. Don't assume that someone is female just because what you see in front of you looks like they're female to you. They might not identify as female. Or just assume that they're heterosexual. And one of the things also plays into that, which is also once again quite relevant in our community, is don't assume that people don't have traumas, because I think this is something that a lot of times in society there's an assumption that people are trauma-free, which is very silly, because I think everyone has some trauma in their life, but especially a lot of LGBTQ plus people have traumas there, and I think it's very important to remember that and to be vigilant in that, to make sure to be respectful as well. If someone says like, I can't do this, I have to sit this out, have a conversation about it. Maybe someone is not relaxing because they find it very hard to relax because they're always on edge, instead of because they're trying to be combative. So that's something I would also, I would also add to that, non-assumption. And then the other thing is just, be open-minded, be respectful. It's pretty self-explanatory, but one thing I would say in that is it's okay to ask questions. A lot of people, I've noticed a lot of people try not to ask questions because they think it's disrespectful to question you. I don't think that's the case. I'm very happy if people can ask me questions in a respectful manner. I'm always happy to explain things, to talk about things, as long as your question is out of curiosity and out of trying to understand me better, I will respect you more for it, not less, if you ask me questions. And I think it's very important to keep asking each other questions. So yeah, that's
a great
my
point.
opinion.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, so many amazing points already made for sure. I was going to actually say the same thing, Sarah, that yeah, just resist the urge to assume. I think that goes along with a lot of the power structures that we've been talking about too in this segment as well. I do want to just echo something Sam wrote in the chat. Question what you and what and who your society centers, and I think assumptions kind of go into that a lot because our assumptions are based on what society centers. So, you know, it is kind of the default that someone will be either a man or a woman, or someone will be heterosexual. That's kind of the default of what our society centers, and that's what your assumptions are based around. So considering that and factoring that in and trying to break that down is kind of the big important movement of our time, I think. And getting to a point where we can, yeah, not immediately assume that someone is what we assume they are, essentially. So that's a big thing I would like to encourage. Also, I was going to, just a small little thing, you know, when you have a new student sign up for your course, ask them their pronouns, you know, make sure that that's a normalized part of your practice, I think, because it's really important. I mean, obviously we did it today. We have them in the chat as well. And it's just a nice, even if you never use those pronouns in class or something, you know, it's just good to ask because it normalizes the whole process, the whole practice. And again, goes with not assuming. So it's a good thing to do. Also, I was going to say, accept that you will occasionally mess up. You will make mistakes, and you will misgender someone. You will do that. Where this is an evolving process, and so you know everyone will make mistakes. I mean, I've made mistakes too, like using people's incorrect pronouns because I've defaulted to that because it's just easy to do sometimes, and it's easy to fall back on some of the things you've grown up learning. So I would say, like, you know, accept that it happens, but also take responsibility for it. So if you do make a mistake, do make sure to apologize and just try to, you know, improve on that in the future for sure. And then, yeah, just again, echoing Jamie's point, yeah, let's reconsider our relationship with police in the future, because just the natural power structure in this country benefits the power of police so much. They have basically a complete monopoly on how violence can be used in the world. And so I think it's very important to not give them any you know, special treatment, or basically try to benefit them in any way. I don't know. I'm not explaining it very well. I think listen to what Jamie said a lot better. He articulated a lot better than I did, but just something to echo for sure.
Yeah, that might be a second Zoom discussion. It's an interesting topic, and you know, I've thought not necessarily about you know, benefiting or police and obviously supporting that kind of violence, but how could Aikido help people diffuse situations in a nonviolent way and in a much better way? And maybe Aikido can be taught to mental health people, mental health counselors, bring it to the nonviolent or the violent responders, things like that. Because I think the more Aikido is out there in the world, and the philosophies Aikido are out there in the world, it is this philosophy of nonviolence and pacification. And I think that can and should be spread through our culture. So we're coming to the end here. We're getting to the end. I think everyone's okay to go over a little bit over though. And I think Sam wanted to have one more moment to that last beat, and then we'll get final thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I think bringing your authentic self is really important, but also, as I mentioned, Aikido is constant inquiry and improvement. And I don't think that just is for techniques. I think we need to be more comfortable exploring that really uncomfortable space existing there. And even if you haven't been there for most of your life, get familiar with it. And I hope that you can find ways for Aikido to assist you in doing that.
Great. And I wanted to talk to our host, Leah Sensei, real quick, just about why it's important to have a dojo that's inclusive. Like I said, I've always felt safe being who I am at Leah Sensei's dojo, and I'm sure that Leah Sensei has also, you know, seen a lot in the many, many years that she's trained with all different types of people. So Leah Sensei, why is inclusivity so important to your dojo? You know, why is it important for you to foster an environment where people feel safe and like they can be themselves?
So thank you very much. First of all, even before I answer that question, thank you very much. This is more moving than I had even expected already, this call. I really am grateful to hear about your thoughts, your insights, your experiences. Getting back to the question then, you know, one word that I've heard many times in this call is transformative, transformation, transform. And Aikido has and continues to be a very transformative practice for me. I should be looking at the camera. I can count on it. I've been able to count on Aikido for the past, I guess, almost 40 years now to be transformative and to lead me. It's been, there's a quote of O Sensei, Aikido is medicine. So anyway, I know that it has some very, very powerful benefits. So, you know, why should I hoard this? Why should I keep it only for this group of people or only for that group of people? And Aikido has given me a lot. It's time for me to give back. And one of the things that I absolutely love about Aikido is watching this transformation in others, watching these benefits hit them, and watching them grow and develop, watching people grow, develop. One time a woman told me after a couple of years training with me, wow, you know, when I started training with you, my husband and I were having trouble. We were going to get a divorce. And thanks to Aikido, I no longer feel like I want to get divorced. So, but anyway, so there's all different people. And also we grow from that too. So I want to share it with everybody. And also, you know, it's like if I train and, oh my gosh, Shihonage, well, I don't want to do Shihonage with this person who's so much smaller than me because I don't really have to bend my knees and that's going to be so uncomfortable. Oh my God, you know, no, we do it and we learn then, you know, and the whole dojo benefits then because we got a tall person and a small person, heavy person, skinny person. Wow, what a benefit for this dojo, a fast person, a slow person, a person with a knee that makes them kind of wobble when they come up to you, you know, like whatever it is. So, and this is the beauty of Aikido, you know, the I in Aikido, another pronunciation for it is awase, means adjust. So this is a great training for us to adjust to each other. So, and I love, whoever, I think it was Sarah first, Sarah's reminder that like, it's okay to ask. So as someone who's not LGBTQ and a dojo owner, and also Ben's saying like, hey, you're gonna mess up, you're gonna forget the pronouns sometimes, you know. To hear those things as a non-LGBTQ dojo owner, I was like, oh, whew, good. That's really helpful. So, and then there's one more aspect to it that's a great practice for me of Shoshin, beginner's mind. And that's so important in Aikido. So, in this call today, I really tried to take sort of a kohai position. So you guys are my senpai in this world. So I'll leave it there, I think.
Yeah, I think we have, if everyone's good on time, we could do a quick Q&A.
Nice.
If anyone in the audience has has questions they want to ask, they could use the hand raising thing, or just message me directly in the chat box on the bottom. You hit chat, and then you can select my name, Chris Coates, and ask me a question that I can pass on to everyone. Okay, I'll unmute you real quick, and then you can ask it in your own voice.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for this conversation. This is so eye-opening and interesting for me, and I'll speak on behalf of Tim as well. I do have a question, which might be a bit weird, but is it possible to kind of overdo it, right? If somebody is trying so hard to be welcoming and inclusive, and to an extent that it feels to you as overdoing, or shall we just keep going?
Can I grab that?
Yeah, I could tell you wanted to.
Definitely, it can be over. You can other someone just right by treating them totally differently. And I know for myself and a lot of other people have talked about, as they share their story, that freedom of being a body in a gi and treated like that is also like a whole nother level of exploration with yourself and just training on the mat. And it's wonderful that we all wear gis, dogi, and there's other gendered within that we're figuring out. But there's totally a way to overdo it where if you're like, oh, was that okay about that identity that you hold? Okay, cool. I'm going to do this. Wait, was that okay with that identity that you hold? Because I know that you hold it and it's really important. Okay, cool. And it's like, it was just a tenkan. Just do the tenkan. And so that, yes, ask questions. Yes, be welcoming, but do bring that welcoming to everyone. And so whereas we're asking you to explicitly invite people in, people that may not be present on the mat, folks that may be missing on the mat, but as well, that compassion and kindness that you extend should be really similar throughout your dojo, because you want everyone to bring their authentic selves and that be a place where people can blossom. So yeah, othering just by virtue of hyper-focusing and fixating is also definitely can be overdone.
Ben, I know you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's, it can definitely happen. And that was kind of what I was getting at with my point that, except that you might make mistakes sometimes, I feel like what happens with me, at least, maybe not necessarily in professional relationships, but with personal relationships, if I address to someone that they maybe misgendered me, used the wrong pronoun, something like that, they often get a little overly apologetic to a point that it makes me feel a little uncomfortable, because then it makes me feel like my identity has made you uncomfortable in a completely different way than how you might expect them to make you uncomfortable. So, that's why when you make a mistake, I always say the best thing you can just say is sorry, it won't happen again, or something like that, and then just kind of moving on in those situations, or just having a private conversation, not making it so public, things like that, little things like that you can do to make everyone feel a little bit more comfortable and not overdoing it, for sure.
Dan?
Yeah, thank you. I kind of echo some of the same ideas, and I think that sometimes the over-othering that can happen, it kind of seems like it comes from a place of really generosity, but I think it's kind of a displacement of someone's discomfort. A lot of times that they feel uncomfortable around a queer person, so they want to do as much as they can to make that person feel safe without actually like getting too close and making themselves feel uncomfortable, right? So the othering is like putting someone at a distance where it's like on the surface it seems welcoming, but you're actually keeping your distance so that you don't have to deal with it. So that's what I feel. And again, like I said, since I came out after I already started Aikido, I feel some of that in a personal level where the way they relate to me has shifted drastically, from the first couple years I practiced to the last, 4 years or so. Once I came out, things shifted for some people. And I think there is a level to that. It's like Ben said in a previous question, kind of, or Sarah maybe too, asking questions respectfully is something that I'm sure we'd all invite and welcome. But the over-othering is like a step too far, and I think it's like not out of a place of genuine interest, and more out of a place of cultivating that distance. So I think that that's something that, as if you're a cisgender person, you can do like a somatic check, like, do I feel uncomfortable when someone says they're gay to me? And rather than like just dismissing that discomfort and then trying to pretend like it's okay, you can actually check in with it and figure out like, what about this is making you feel uncomfortable, and ask respectful questions, and not just like over other and over create, safety guards around it, but actually relate to that person on a real human level.
And I think Jamie had one more thought, and then I don't want to.
Something that like I think is related to all the things that were already mentioned is like a guiding question. This comes from like maybe like my therapist training, but like, who is it for? I think if you ask yourself the question of like, who is this for right now? Is it to regulate my own anxiety? Is it to regulate my own discomfort? Or is this actually going to be something that is like positively impactful for this person who I'm trying to welcome? And like that person will be giving you feedback in the moment and maybe even later about how those things land. And I think that like checking in with that person about like, all right, like how is my behavior actually landing with you is like really important. Because I think that often when we try to be welcoming, like we are actually doing it for ourselves, right? And I think that like that guiding question of like, who is this? What am I doing? Who am I doing this for right now? Is one to keep in mind, and will help you make that distinction.
Any other thoughts for anyone, or questions from any of the viewers?
Just really fast from what Jamie said. You yourself are also a person that should be cared for, and but I think we're asking people to question the ways in which they care for themselves to move that discomfort rather than addressing it. So yes, also care for yourself, but notice how you do that as well.
All right. Last chance for questions. Anyone in the audience? Cool. So real quick, I think I just want to go around and just ask everyone how Aikido has enriched their life in one sentence or less. Just real quick. For me, I think I am a stronger, better, more peaceful and open-minded person because of Aikido. Ben?
Yeah, I think I covered it a little bit before, but it's allowed me to connect with my body in ways that I previously wasn't able to do. And yeah, has also just made me a lot more of a conscious person.
Sarah?
Yeah, for me, so safe to say by completely taking it over and providing me with a lot of community and also a lot of opportunities for becoming stronger and growing in many different ways.
Spencer?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I use Aikido on a daily basis, whether I'm on the mat or not, in terms of relationship negotiation, as well as conflict resolution. And that is so helpful in today's society and political environment full of conflict. Invaluable.
Jamie? Oh, sorry, Jamie?
Yeah, I think the practice has just made me feel a lot safer, more comfortable, more confident in my own skin. And I think also it's made me feel like I'm part of something that's bigger than myself. And I think that that's just something that we could all really use.
Tim?
Yeah, Aikido has empowered me to be my whole genuine self, and just finding a path of being able to.
Oh, I think we lost you there a little bit.
Oh, you lost me?
Yeah, cut out for a sec.
Oh, well, I'll just say it again for parity's sake. Yeah, Aikido has empowered me to be my whole genuine self, and given me that greater tool of listening in all interpersonal relationships.
And Sam?
Yeah, I believe that I am understanding my integrated self better, so that when I do find connection and help build relationships, I can offer, even if it's a facet of myself, but an authentic piece, whereas someone else may not be able to bring that forward initially. I think Aikido specifically has helped me draw out the genuine in others, because I can offer a true piece of myself.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been really beautiful for me. I mean, even being an LGBTQ person, I heard a lot of things here today that I necessarily hadn't thought about or weren't in the front of my mind, but then clicked and it's like, oh yeah, I feel that way too. So this has been really beautiful. Leah Sensei, thank you so much for hosting this, for allowing us to have this space to talk about it. I feel like we all, this was a really cathartic, beautiful thing for us discussion for us to have. So thank you. And thank you all for coming, and everyone who watched, thank you for being here.
Thank you all so much. Great to be in community with everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody.